Welcome to Business Mastery with Don Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. It is time for us to talk about the humanity in business, the humans who make business what business is. We talk a lot about data and strategies, but at the end of the day, it's the people who have to execute and the people who have to benefit from our business. Otherwise, we don't last long. So I have Graham here, and we're going to talk all about it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
Sure. Graham Skidmore, and I serve those who want to invest in a human-centric, those who desire a human-centric future by investing in humans as individuals, where we use AI to augment human agency and capabilities, not replace it.
All right, perfect. So, yeah, let's first talk about that. There's been this huge rise in AI, and people seem to be really going back and craving that human connection, especially in certain things like customer service. But the humanity piece, the human in the loop, even if they're adjuncting with AI, do you feel like I do, that maybe that has been overlooked a little bit in this rush to make AI everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what we're experiencing is the double-edged sword of capitalism, right? On one hand, it's great because it's meant to reward and spur invention and innovation. However, it can also cause short-sightedness, right? Which is, how do I just make more money faster? And I think that that really has been a lot of what the approach has just been focused on. How do we use this for efficiencies, not just, and then we're missing the aspect of effectiveness. And right, and I think to create change that can benefit all, that's just strictly beyond bottom line gains, I think you need to add the effectiveness into that. And so, to your point, right, I'm not. It's not like I'm anti AI, right? I definitely don't. I'm not a conspiracy person or any of that stuff, right? I'm just much more pro human, and so right, yeah. And so for me, AI is it's like it's like a calculator. A calculator is a great, wonderful tool to help with math. But just because a calculator might be better at math than me doesn't mean that it possesses greater intelligence than me. It's an amazing tool and should be recognized as a tool. It can take care of a lot of heavy lifting that creates efficiencies in my workflow, but then also allows me to be much more effective because for somebody like me who's diagnosed with dyscalculia, like math dyslexia, right, being able to use a calculator absolutely. To complement where we need compliments as individuals so that we can focus on our human skills, right, and leveraging them, which is interpretation. Look, and I think that empathy and stewardship are the two foundations to product development, and and building a successful company that can stand the test of time. And those are things that a human is much better suited to work with.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the things in business that are uniquely human, that no matter what the future ends up looking like, it would be incredibly difficult, if not almost impossible, to replace with technology. There are things like you said, empathy, that is uniquely human, and why do we not give that, I guess, enough attention?
you know I don't know, I guess this is my current read on things, and I think that what we're also seeing with the way you say, with the way that AI is being looked at, is it really accentuating what I consider to be one of the number one problems, challenges facing us as a society, is that these the one size fits all systems and the one size fits all beliefs they're kind of used to govern things. The education system, the work system, really minimizes the opportunity that's available to us. And so I think what we're seeing right now is, okay, there's this box of what it means to be a normal human. There's this box of what it means to be successful. There's this box of what it means to be successful in business. There's this box of what it means to be a good employee. So now we take AI and we say, okay, where's all these humans that aren't in the box like we want them to be? And how do we use AI to get them into this box? And so, and in doing, if we're all thinking the same and we're all being the same, well, we're really missing a whole lot of opportunity there. And so, my point is, we need to be leveraging AI and recognizing that we each have our own individual box of normal. right? And so how do we, and then leveraging AI to augment our agency to help us to be able to contribute into the larger box of society, but by being able to, but by doing it, by being able to leverage our individual skills and gifts and perspectives and experiences to be able to do that, which AI doesn't represent, right? If you were, right, and that's kind of always my gripe in the current state is that it doesn't represent your perspective, my perspective, our perspective, and then come up with a win-win solution. It's based on this. Hey, this is kind of how things are supposed to be, and this is what you need to do to fit into it. I know I'm oversimplifying, but
Right, so I understand. So let's talk about this expected box of success because I think it is much easier if everything is cookie cutter, right? We don't have to be creative. We don't have to think outside that box, if you will. We're not required to lean into the intangibles because data, for the most part, we could consider something tangible as far as making decisions. Curious as to, the humanity and the investment in the humanity in our own boxes to, I guess, what's the marketing in that? And I know that's probably an odd question, but isn't that sort of what we've been moving towards the last 10, 15 years is this one size fits all and everything in 2 days, and this is, when you work from home, or this is what happens when you, um, implement a new product, or this is how you always do the thing, because it makes it more efficient, overall, even though, to your point, um it's the one size fits all actually doesn't work. That just seems to be the prevailing theory.
yeah, I think that. Well, I agree with you thoroughly. But I mean, everything has gone into this optimization, compartmentalize, bring things down, or and then figure out how to put the pieces together that in the most effective way. Um, and I think that in education and health and wellness is probably the first two industries where um, the individualized approach can be demonstrated and the value in it. And I think that 20 years ago, before the ability to leverage technology, if you wanted to try to work with people as individuals, that meant a lot of manpower, right? And that just wasn't very practical. And the same thing, in the education system, right? If you acknowledge that there's many different learning styles, however, you're not going to, it's ineffective or inefficient right now, or not practical to have five different teachers in the classroom, each um, what's it called, to teach, based on their respective ways of learning into the classroom. But with technology, you can now do that, right? You can lean into those things, right? And same thing with health and wellness, right? There's this belief that humans are all supposed to we all have the same physiology, and when we're all treated the same way. But and again, and while there's certain elements of truth to that, there's not. But what I think that what we're seeing right now is in what we're looking at when we look at the human potential is and I think that there's a lack of acknowledging human potential because we have created a self-fulfilling prophecy of capping out the human potential by putting everybody into one size fits all box and saying that, this is, I see this, we've stifled the human potential and what's available by putting everybody in this one size fits all box. And so therefore then the approach becomes, well, hey, if humans are tapped out, well, how do we, break through that barrier? Oh, that's where we need AI. Well, no, no, let's back up the bus, right? If we started actually investing in humans as individuals and had everybody operating at their capacity, especially in the intellectual capacity, now it becomes a very different ball game when you're comparing humans that can invent and innovate with AI that really is focused on optimization. And you need all those pieces together. But we've got to get back to believing that humans are worth investing in it, and that the human intellect is worth investing in. And that's where that doesn't necessarily bold so well in a capitalist society until you find a solution that can where capitalism can prevail, so to speak, or there's an upside for capitalism.
Right. So investing in the human potential, particularly the intellectual potential. I know that there's people driving now who are listening in or maybe just watching the video and going, but I went to school. I have my degrees and I pay for continuing education and I send my employees to their conferences for learning. Isn't that investment in their human potential?
It is, and that's where I add to the caveat, but it's not in their potential as an individual.
Mm.
It's not in their individual potential. It's helping their potential. Yeah, so it's certainly better than nothing. But it's not. achieving the full potential that's available for that individual.
So what would that look like? Where would we start to make those considerations?
So I think that this is where I think the learning process is really where I see the first piece of low hanging fruit with incorporating AI and humans together, is because we all agree that there's a certain in society, while we can all be quote unquote snowflakes, there are certain agreements that we all have. We're going to treat each other with respect, dignity. People say read the room. Okay, well, telling somebody to read the room and then asking the person to be able to read the room the same way that you read the room may not necessarily work out, because you have your experiences, you have your biases, you have your gender, ethnicities, culture, religions, and things like that, and work experience that are going to determine what you pick up on based on what you see. And I have mine, and they may not always intertwine. And so what needs to happen is, okay, how do we identify what those gaps are and help the and look, and we are going to have to lean a little bit towards into the majority and recognize that the majority is what's setting the status quo and what you're being measured against. And so if you're not part of that, how do we use technology to help you recognize the difference between what you see, what others see, not that because you're right or wrong, but just different, so that you can build bridges and recognize where the disconnects are, so you can speak to those disconnects and speak to those people through those languages. And that was one of, like, for me personally, that was always one of the biggest challenges that I had, was that, my ability to creative problem solve and see things differently was wonderful. It created a ton of revenue. Trying to get me always on the same page with everybody else in the room, though, was a whole other ballgame. And it required somebody who was willing to sit down and talk with me to say, I don't understand why people don't see it this way. How do you see this with this same set of data? Because to me, it's so clear that it's this. It's not, and so that's where I see the ability to have learning modules to bridge those gaps, to help people recognize. I guess, essentially you're helping people to recognize empathy. You're using it to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, so that you can relate and speak to that without having to give up your own agency, without having to give up your own beliefs, without having to compromise your own, uh, you know, way of interacting with the world, but now being able to be better received in what you're trying to accomplish.
So do you see a marked change, let's say over the last, I don't know, 20, let's say 20 years, um, between people being able to put themselves in someone else's shoes? It almost feels like when you say that, it's like, wow, I do kind of remember that years ago anyway, in school and, in internships and in those kinds of training things, they would say, well, do you know how someone else would see this? Is that not being asked anymore? Are we not, have we removed that I would call empathy, but putting yourself in someone else's shoes or seeing second and third order effects from someone else's vision? Do you feel like that's maybe a skill that's no longer being taught?
You know, I think there's a difference. So yes, I think it gets brought up, but it's almost, but I feel like it's brought up, and again, I'm painting broad brush, and not obviously
Sure,
sexist
sure, of
of
course.
any company in America here, right? But I think it's a bit of a mask. I think it's a little misleading, because while people are bringing that up, there is still this belief that we're doing these things to get you to see it our way. And so, right? And so, yeah, actually, I'm
Right.
gonna ask you where you're at so that I can understand where the disconnect is, but how we're going to fix this disconnect is getting you to see it my way, not and so that goes back to, how do I best get you to fit into that box? And
So
taking that approach.
it's more convincing rather than being truly open-minded is what you're saying. Like, it's more
Yeah,
about.
I think that's a better way to say it than what I was saying. Yeah.
But it's I mean, that's really what it is, right? So we've been taught, and maybe that is the skill shift that leadership books and other people, have been taught in classes and things, that while it's a leadership thing to ask how you see things or your open-mindedness, underneath that, it could be just, "I'm asking because I need to see the disconnect because 'cause you're not in the box. We need to get you in the box.
Yeah.
So
And
I'm
the other
asking
part
you because you need to go in the box, not because I respect your box."
Pretty much, right, and I think the other part of that is, look, companies, and let's just say that, from years 20 to 10 ago, companies, let's say, gave it the good old college try and said, "Well, look, hey, look, you do believe this, let's try it." But then if you, as an organization, if you don't see the upside in doing that, typically, which is meant in revenue generation, or profitability, then you kinda go like, "Look, how much is this? How much time, energy, money am I really going to put into this? And how much value am I really going to put into this if it doesn't create a meaningful impact in my business? And that's then kind of where it boils down to the what the company values, right?
Right.
And so then I think that we've kind of seen us get away where people are like, hey, look, same thing with like DEI, right? It sounds like a good concept, but if I'm not getting a tangible return that's meaningful to my business, it doesn't make sense for me to keep investing in it this way. And then so that kind of falls to the wayside.
Right. So basically, we've sort of tied the human condition to the bottom line when it comes to business instead of the human condition to the impact to the organization, whether or not there's a dollar revenue generated.
Absolutely.
So how do we start to address this? Because to your point, when I was, thinking about this and saying, what about trade shows and things? You're right. That is limited to your almost your business ability or, the relationships that you build or the courses that you go to are really meant primarily to impact that one area of your life, which is where you work. Maybe it'll have some spillover into your other relationships and interactions, but I think that we do sort of segregate that or put it in a silo that if you're gonna do professional development or personal development, it's meant to primarily benefit, the organization that is sending you.
Yeah. And I think this is when we talk about valuing creative problem solving, we talk about valuing free thinkers, but typically that's valued in hindsight. Because until you actually create the impact, it's more like just get in line and conform, right? Like you said, people were like, "Hey, I go to school." We go to school to learn the same set of information and essentially to think about things the same way, right? How do we run a marketing campaign? What are the basics of it? What are the measurements of it? Right? Everybody comes out thinking the same, generally speaking, right? And so it's not. Um, And so along the way, I think this is where the rub comes in is that people are conditioned to fit in until they somehow find a way to break out of that mold. And then then it's valued in hindsight and then can be, leveraged throughout the system, but it's still thought of, no, it's not just, it's still thought of as the minority, that we should be investing our time because to an extent you do need some alignment, right? To be able to operate in business. Right. So I don't want to, but how do the key is again, it's not that one size fits all. It's okay, we need to here's where we need to be aligned, but now how do we unleash the problem solving of our people? How do we unlock the innovation? How do we unlock the invention without then also unlocking chaos?
Right. Was it Steve Jobs who said you can't connect the dots going forward, only going backward? I think it was his statement where he's like, "Yeah, you can see everything and connect the dots going in reverse, but you can't see it in front of you when you're going forward." Um, and I think what I'm hearing here also is as far as like unleashing people's creative abilities and making those investments in people individually. Um, overall the benefit is a much more not just competent or confident workforce, but one that might be even more willing to do things like embrace technology where it's necessary and maybe lower some resistance to change inside an organization because they feel like they're being heard and they feel like they're being valued in that individual capacity.
Yeah, and I think that this is where for those that are listening, especially in a management role, they're probably like, "Look, man, I give my people opportunities, but they don't bring me anything." So, you're just spouting some some hooey, some ideology there, Graham. And I certainly understand that. I would push back and say though is, yeah, but is what you're seeing really a self fulfilling prophecy though? Because my experience has been in the majority of places I've interacted with and people I've spoken to is that the managers make the decisions and the people that report to them, responsibility is putting together the information and then bringing it to them. Okay. And so if you, and if that's the way that it is, people are spending all of their time doing the heavy lifting versus the thinking. And so, yeah, you haven't given them the ability to, um, bring their brain to the table in the same way that you're able to bring your brain to the table. And this is where AI then can really, be a huge help because it can take away those hours that are being put into the heavy lifting of the gathering of the data, of doing the basic analysis so that somebody else can make the decision. And so now, you have the AI that does the heavy lifting, but now you can better leverage the subject matter expert for their creative problem solving abilities and their revenue generating ideas, and or whatever is applicable that really matters. And I think that's one of the disconnects that exists right now in the chain.
Do you think it is because just historically or traditionally, they don't necessarily expect you to bring your brain to the table until you reach a certain level? Should we be encouraging more bring your brain even at the most junior level or the intern level? I think that traditionally there's been a bias towards experience versus that creativity. I'm curious on what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think, and this, I guess, again goes back to the way an organization is set up, what it values, and the leaders and the managers. Because in some cases, the manager's like, "Hey, look, I come up with the ideas, I figure out the plan, and your job is just to go execute." Okay, right, all right. Um, but then that same manager gets upset when somebody doesn't solve a problem the way that they would. Well, they're like, "Well, you've put me into a purely an execution role. You didn't ask me to think. You didn't ask me to have a working knowledge of this information. You just asked me to do." Right? And so now then again, you have then that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy based on the outlook. And yeah, I mean, there's nobody that's more valuable to come up with solutions than the people that are dealing with why it's a problem to begin with. Right? And I think that sometimes it's quick to discredit people because they haven't maybe achieved the same title, or they're not as, where based on where somebody's at is that in the hierarchy where somebody needs to have accomplished a certain amount of a thing before their thoughts are worthy of being heard or listened to.
Okay. So how do we start to address that? Where do we start to make those investments? Do we and to your point, I agree with you 100% about AI can go out now and crawl and do all of the research and all the trend data and provide all those things that you could be looking for as long as you prompt it correctly and you sort of know what you're doing with it, that you'll get the relevant data that you need, 10 times faster, maybe even more than that, to be able to make those moves and execute and make decisions. So with that free time, and I'll agree with you that we are absolutely freeing up people's hours in the day where they would go out and have to collate data and fill up spreadsheets, manually. Now that stuff can be done quickly. So how do we start to include the human in the loop in these broader, bigger decisions and unleash their potential?
No, I mean, the easiest way to do it is to make it a thing by, you know, I don't know, so I said making it a requirement, right? Requiring people to provide their input, or, you know, or providing like an innovation day, or a time for, like an own internal Shark Tank where people can come up with their own ideas and present them, right? So maybe, and I think, little things like that, are just a great start, to start getting people thinking, and also providing the space and the support, to be able to bring their ideas too. But the leadership also has to recognize that if they don't implement some ideas, the people are gonna stop thinking, right? And so that's, I think, a lot of what's going on too, is that, hey, I gave some chances, it didn't work out the way that I thought it to, so I just stopped giving chances.
So people shut down also if they're not being implemented. So that
Yeah,
we're
I mean, I dealt with that a lot.
yeah. I don't
I was one of those, I could tell you, my prior life, and I spent more of my time being that, "Hey, just execute" guy. And then, once I recognized how much was being left on the table because I wasn't, you know, trusting and tapping into the subject matter experts enough. And once I learned how to do that, you know, product production went up, morale went up, enjoyment for all of us then went up. But I had to be willing to look in the mirror and go, okay, I'm the barrier right now.
yeah. I love this idea of the internal Shark Tank. Have you done that? Have you participated in something like that? That sounds really fun, actually.
Yeah, I did, it was quite a while ago, but yeah, we did something like that at, Quicken Loans, now Rocket Mortgage, to help spur that. And, sometimes there were monetary incentives associated with it as well, or other incentives. So that it wasn't just, hey, get my idea done, but, you know, that we, um, everybody appreciates a little extra reward, whether it be getting stuff or money for going above and beyond.
Right. So going above and beyond, but this actually, if we implement this correctly, will become kind of the new brand standard that the humanity of the people and the empathy and all of the truly human attributes will be the ones on full display and being invested in.
Absolutely. I mean, if we just simply as a manager, if you look at your people and go, what is needed to take Bob or Jane from A to their potential? Well, first of all, let's understand what do I believe that the difference is in the potential between or the opportunity between where Jane and Bob is at and what their potential is. Now, what's holding them up? Are these things that I can solve for? Are they things that I can leverage technology to solve for? And then am I willing to, do I feel like it's worth the investment to do so? All right. And then from there, right, then Jane and Bob go, okay, again, through stewardship, this is my customer. This is how we're serving the customer. This is how we say it. This is what we say we want to be serving the customer. What's that disconnect? What is now standing in the way of doing that? Is it process? Is it money? Is it tools? Is it access? Is it product? And then, based on what's missing, are we willing to invest as a company to bridge that gap as well, right? And so it's the same thought process all the way down, just being applied to a different user set.
Right. Yeah. So instead of that technology spend, there would be that humanity spend, or a cross of the two. So, do you see any companies that are actually doing this really well that may have given some sort of framework or insight or some sort of way to start to wrap your head around this? Because the humanity piece is intangible, the impact is obviously pretty tangible. Typically see it.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Where I've been a little bit. So what I was the one example that I like to use is there was a mom. So this is a very this is a small business, and her son got labeled with what we call a learning disability, or just didn't learn the same way as everybody else.
Right.
And so she recognized, so she leveraged technology to, as dyslexic, that's what it was. And so she created a tool, a technology tool to help him learn based on how he learned. And then she recognized there was the same thing with, then people, even though, with dyslexia learn a certain way, but then ADHD learned a certain way, autistic learned a certain way. So she just kind of repurposed the same technology to reference the different way that these people, that everybody learned, so that the end game was they still learned the same subject matter expert or the same subject matter information, and were able to become competent with the information, but their learning path was different. And so to me, that's one of the things that really represents, what I believe in is leveraging technology to help the individual. But again, what we aren't treating everybody as snowflakes in the sense of we're all operating out of chaos. No, we're also trying to learn the same thing. It's just the path to getting there is what really needs to be individualized.
Yes, it's kind of that meet you where you are, so that you can, excel in the best way that you can learn the material. And then when that happens in a company, because I can kind of see the second and third where it probably builds a lot more confidence. And with that confidence, people are probably more willing to speak up as well.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, as again, I can speak from my experience of shutting it down by being the know-it-all, in the past, or not giving people the proper floor to speak to. And then, yeah, so then I end up creating self-fulfilling prophecies. People are like, dude, every time I stick my head out, you can chop it off. So why would I do that? Every time I bring an idea, you shut it down. So why do I want to keep doing that? So essentially what you see, Graham, while you're frustrated with me because I'm not bringing you ideas or creativity, what I'm telling you is what you're actually seeing is a reflection of how you've treated me and the opportunities that you have or have not given me. So, so something's got to give here in this chain if in order for something to change.
Right. Right. Makes a lot of sense. And again, this isn't anti-technology and this isn't this is just the reality of we have spent so many years prioritizing one in the name of to your point, optimization over the other in the name of optimization is really what it feels like. Um,
Yes, and I think that that's the problem with this one size fits all box, right? Is that now it becomes a game of optimization. How can I best optimize inside this box? Which absolutely AI is better set up to win that game. But when we talk about how do I continue to grow that box, now that's where the human contribution comes
right. So where can people find you, learn more about you, stalk you on social maybe?
in. Yeah, I think that if it's someone is interested from a health and wellness perspective of what we're doing, then please check us out at harmonyhealthinstitute.com. But if somebody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, Graham Skidmore. So LinkedIn /Graham Skidmore is a way to connect with me. I publish articles there with obviously different perspectives on a lot of things. And or just if you want to reach out and say, hey, that's cool.
All right. So LinkedIn's the best platform to reach
Yeah.
out and um, go to your website for more information about how you're leveraging this in your business. All right. So we're going to put that all down inside the show notes. So if you find this on the day it launches or you find it 2 years later, you will still be able to find Graham and you will still be able to read his articles and you'll still be able to get the information that you may be looking for. So thank you so much for having this conversation. And I really do think it's a balancing act at this point as it's relatively new, but not really. It's kinda like the PC was in '84. Just, we're getting there. We think we know what we're doing. We think we know how big it's gonna be. But to your point, it's going to keep going, and if it's all in the name of optimization, I think humans will have to be left outside that box because we can't optimize like a math problem.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think the thing that's a little different is that um, like there's a societal factor here that's much bigger, right? When you start putting people out of jobs, and I think that there's a much larger ethical component that we as a society and companies and businesses have to decide where is that line? What line aren't we willing to cross for the sake of profit? And, I think that that's one of the things that's got to get figured out if we're really going to figure out how to integrate and make the most out of tools and humans and everybody working together. Um, so that doesn't have to be a one-sided, such a lopsided kind of discussion like it is right now.
Yeah.
There's
That's
us versus them. Yeah, there's nothing the good that comes from us versus them.
No, not at all. That's a great wrap up. Well, thank you so much for being here and having this conversation. I think it's incredibly timely and important as we're moving through 2026.
Yes, thank you again so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to y'all next time on the next episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to DawnKKennedy.com, and you can now check us out on YouTube as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.